Hi, I'm Itzá García. I am a composer and I currently live in New York City. I am studying my PhD in music composition at CUNY, the Graduate Center, and I'm originally from Mexico. I want to give a big thanks to Composers Now for allowing me to share some of my music and some of my thoughts around composition. I hope you enjoy it. So this area of the park is constantly filled with music. And that can be very nice, especially when there's just one group or one source of music happening. But this area actually, especially in the weekends, there is this thing that happens where multiple sound sources, music sources, multiple ensembles even are playing at the same time right next to each other. And what happens then is that each of the sound sources, whether it comes from a loudspeaker or it comes from live performers, they tend to lock in to their own tempo and keep playing the beat as if there were no other people around. And the next piece that I want to share with you, that is called Descargas number 2, is a work for percussion quartet in which I use polytempo techniques to create this compound reality. So each of the performers have their own tempos and they're playing different tempos at the same time, but the rhythmic patterns that they use that are inspired in Afro-Latin rhythms and the instruments that they use that are part of the percussion base of salsa music allow them to blend together or to try to connect with each other while being apart with this polytempo situation. There is a kind of joy in performing electronic music with some form of controller or sensor. And also, I think that there are certain instruments or controllers that tend to fit people. Some people feel more comfortable, making an instrument and managing a joystick or a sensor or a touchpad. And there are other kinds of sensors that can also be used for electronic music, which are maybe not so obvious. This creative path eventually took me to creating this piece, Terminos, that is a work for Pierrot Quintet and eye tracker. I was very interested in these technologies of eye tracking. There have been other composers who have worked with those technologies before. But certainly today there seems to be more ways to do that very DIY. So for this piece I created Max Patch, adapted a Max Patch that is tracking the motions of the eye. What the Max Patch does basically is to track the light that is bouncing off the iris of the performer in this case, and it's using the regular computer webcam to do so. Another thing that was very unexpected was how to notate that part for the electronics performer, because their eyes are occupied, making musical expression. So what I ended up doing was to develop a sound score in which I give certain cues that the performer can listen to, and also I give certain directions like of eye motion, so moving the eyes up and down or left to right or in a diagonal or in circles. And all of those motions that are captured by the webcam are translated into triggering sounds and also into signal processing, and the main material that I use is frequency modulation for them. There is a certain aspect of working with sensors that I did not fully understand until I started to do it more and more, and that is the idea of cleaning up the data. So whenever you're using any kind of sensor, can be an infrared sensor, proximity sensor, even a camera or a microphone as a sensor, there is a certain amount of noise that will enter the signal. And it is important to manage that, otherwise, the resulting motion is just not true to what is happening in the interaction. But there is also another aspect of that noise that is actually quite interesting and very expressive in an aesthetic way. It's almost like the aesthetics of the sensor is to be very jittery and chaotic, and we go to certain extents in order to clean that and to make that as smooth as possible. But for certain composers, for example for Alvin Lucier, when he was working on music for solo performer, where he strapped that EEG to his head and had the signals of the alpha waves control some percussion instruments with exciters attached to them. One of the things that he mentions is that the noisiness, the unruliness, the jitteriness of the sensor is part of the piece. And he was asked at some point, why don't you just use, a pulse wave to activate those percussion sounds? And his response was, because you cannot compare a square wave, a symmetrical acoustic wave, to the non-symmetrical, to the jittery nature of the alpha wave. And when we're working with biosignals, that is to say with these signals that emerge from our bodies that may be voluntary or involuntary, there is some element of nature that we are accessing, but there is also some element of noise and of digital or analog translation that is emerging in the connection between what the body is producing and how the equipment is gathering the information. And that in itself, I think, is a color that affects the musical composition and the mode of interaction, and it certainly affects the performance of the piece. So another aspect that I certainly tend to bypass or to forget myself regarding electronic music is that electronic music comes together with the use of automation in music. So in around the same time that the very first electronic instruments were being developed, there was already a practice of automation in acoustic instruments like the player piano or automated organs. And that is something that sometimes I find hard to wrap my head around, that they're not the same. They come from a similar strand, that is that you can, let's say, take the aesthetics of machine in order to perform music, but creation of sound through electricity and automation of sound actually were kind of developed in separate ways. Or, as I said, there are examples of automated instruments that are purely acoustic, and there are examples of electronic instruments that are performed, like the trautonium. So the act of performance is at the very inception of electronic music, as the act of automation is at the very core of acoustic instruments from the 20th century onward. So one interesting thing, or one of the reasons that I decided to compose for an eye tracker, is because to me it kind of signifies, and also to a certain extent simplifies for me, the act of performance together with the performance of the machine. And one of the things that I find very rewarding when I am performing this piece of is that the performance of the machine is completely blurred with my performance, because I am just sitting there motionless on stage. I am moving my eyes, but that is not revealed to the audience. And one of the characteristics of computer music, as composer George Lewis would say, is that in many occasions the computer doesn't need you to perform music. It can do it by itself. It can generate its own material. It can generate its own expression. And when I'm using the eye tracker, because the motion is just so static, or it cannot be perceived so easily, it kind of triggers this understanding of, oh, is it the machine or is it the human that is performing? And I find that blurring of boundaries very, like a very intense experience when I'm performing this piece. Another way in which I have tackled this issue of like human-computer interaction is with the use of augmented reality. So I developed this piece that is called Mitote. It's a sound installation for augmented reality, and Mitote comes from a word in Mexico that it signifies a party that went too wild. So in a mitote, you would have people doing all sorts of things like partying way too hard and dancing and singing and eating and drinking to the point that it all becomes a blur, like a joyful, chaotic blur. So in this piece, I designed some virtual instruments that are modeled after Mexican instruments of folkloric music, the huehuetl and the zampoña, and those act as sculptures that are shown in this mixed reality environment. And the user can basically use a smartphone to see and interact with these virtual sculptures, which, by the way, a smartphone these days has between 10 and 20 different sensors. So these are very good devices to develop, interactive experiences with. So the user, what they do is that they hold the device and then they can see the sound sculptures appearing in the environment. And then when they get closer to them and they pierce through the sculpture, like touching them, that triggers a sound. That sound is then sent via Bluetooth to my computer, where I transform it using a Max MSP patch that is running the piece in real time. And furthermore, that transformation is sent also via Bluetooth to a set of wireless headphones that the user is wearing. So there is actually a very intricate network of wireless communication that is happening in the piece that is present all the time. When I was developing the installation, I was very much aware of what protocol that I needed to use and how the information is coming and going. But for the user, it's a completely transparent experience. They just hold the device, see the virtual sound sculptures, then interact with them and have a sound result almost in real time. And the important thing for me was to also compose a piece for this sound installation so that the I said the performer, so there is a performance aspect to it in my understanding, but the user/performer can have, as I said, a sound result almost instantaneously. So actually people can decide to stay through the whole piece and to have that kind of beginning and end of the experience, or they can choose to start and stop whenever they want. In essence, natural and artificial are opposed to each other. Yet in the reality of human experience, there is this desire of make them disappear into each other in a way such that artificiality or the artificial becomes completely transparent, completely integrated into the natural world. But this is, of course, not possible. And what we end up getting are these attempts of the natural and artificial trying to mimic each other, trying to become each other. But at the same time, they keep signifiers that tell us that they're not the same.